Star Trek: The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Loyalties. Chapter 1. Beverly Howard was not in a good mood. She grit her teeth as she remembered her morning. First, she couldn't find her comm badge. Then she had to crawl between her bed and desk to retrieve a dropped data chip for her morning History of Disease class. On her test, she couldn't recall the year the plasma plague broke out on the planet OB6. On top of that, the professor assigned more homework than anyone expected and held the class over by 5 minutes. And now she was trying to quickly eat her lunch in the cafeteria before her next class, while staring wide-eyed at her roommate, Claire Voy. "You want to do what?" Beverly managed to ask between bites of food. "I said let's skip class," said Claire. Beverly shook her head in disbelief. She met Claire on the transport vessel traveling to Starfleet Academy, neither cadet knowing they were assigned to the same room. She discovered they had plenty in common. Both were born on Luna Colony, on the Earth's moon. Both lived on several different planets while they were growing up, and both wanted to become doctors. But they differed greatly in physical appearance. Beverly was medium height and slender. She had long, straight red hair and fair skin. Claire was a few inches shorter than Beverly and slightly stocky. Her complexion was olive, with straight, short black hair that matched her dark eyes. Beverly stopped eating and stared at her roommate. "Skip class?" "Skip class," Claire echoed, nodding. "But it's for a good cause." "Good cause?" "Bev, you're repeating everything I say," she said, tilting her head in frustration. "Remember the old San Francisco archaeological dig on the edge of the Academy campus?" Beverly nodded. For about a year, archaeologists had been uncovering several buildings damaged from a major earthquake 2 centuries ago. Yesterday's big news around campus was the cave-in at the dig. Part of the area had collapsed the night before. I talked to an upperclassman who's helping with the dig. They're opening part of the exposed section of the cave-in today, and it's a 21st century hospital. "Hospital?" "Bev, you're doing it again." They stopped talking as a cadet neared their table. Beverly waited until he walked by. "Claire, we just can't skip class," she continued, whispering desperately to her roommate, "especially Terran anatomy. We're reviewing for the next test, remember?" Claire pushed back a lock of her short, dark hair that strayed to her forehead. She leaned closer to Beverly. "Yes, I know. But Bev, you and I know the human skeleton. We both have the top marks in the class. Well, besides Dooley Breach, of course. This is for our education," Claire pleaded. "And, Bev, it's a hospital, not just some old moldy stone house." "I think old moldy stone houses are pretty interesting," she retorted, smirking at her roommate. "I grew up in one. You know what I mean." Beverly began to eat her lunch again. "You're crazy, Claire. Why don't you just ask me to steal a shuttle and fly to Alpha Centauri instead?" Claire took a bite of pasta from her plate, then pointed her fork at Beverly. "That's tomorrow. Really, Bev, it won't tarnish your reputation at Starfleet to skip one class. I'm sure even the great cadets of Starfleet probably skipped a class now and then." Beverly sniffed. "I doubt James T. Kirk would have done such a thing." "Want to bet?" Claire retorted. "Just what are you really afraid of, Bev? That your grandmother will find out?" Beverly knew Claire was right. She was afraid her grandmother would find out she skipped class, but she was more afraid that she would let her grandmother down. She had left the comfort of her grandmother's house on Caldos 4 just over 3 weeks ago. Her grandmother had been her constant companion after her parents died. They had lived in several Federation colonies. her grandmother tending to the sick as a healer and doctor. Beverly learned all about herbs, healing, and medicine from her grandmother. Because they lived near the wild or forested areas of the colonies, so her grandmother could collect the healing herbs for her treatments, Beverly was occasionally taught by others in the small surrounding communities. A tall Vulcan woman who worked on computers at one colony taught Beverly mathematics. On another planet, she learned 3 languages from the ambassador from New Britain. But her grandmother taught her the most. From Earth history to all the sciences, she also taught her about life and keeping others alive. By watching her grandmother, Beverly knew something by the time she was only 12 years old. She knew she wanted to be a doctor. Starfleet Academy had not been Beverly's first choice. She originally wanted to attend one of the top medical schools, either the new Johns Hopkins University on Earth or even Luna Colony's Hadley Rail Hospital. But in the end, her grandmother convinced her to try Starfleet Academy. Where else could Beverly learn to be a doctor and still meet so many other species in the galaxy, or experience the adventures she knew Beverly craved? Beverly thought Starfleet Academy would be too hard. Her grandmother had faith that Beverly would do well in such a stimulating environment. But Beverly knew it was not only her grandmother's faith in her that made her feel guilty. There was more. It was several years since the tragedy at the Federation colony on Arvada 3. She and her grandmother lived on the planet during that time, faced tremendous hardship, and survived. They now lived on Caldos 4, and she felt guilty because she had deserted her grandmother to come to the academy, even though it was her grandmother who encouraged her to enter Starfleet Medical. Your grandmother reminds me of Mrs. Owner, said Claire, breaking into Beverly's thoughts. You know, the woman who owns the small cafe just off campus. A good cook, caring, good listener. You should just go with me sometime. She makes the best food in this part of the galaxy and uses herbs and spices from all over. She even makes an apple pie from a 300-year-old Earth recipe. Maybe she could make a better Gringle Dash, said Beverly, pushing her plate away. This replicator's version tastes terrible. Gringle Dash. That's the dish your grandmother always made when you felt rotten, right? Beverly bit her lip and nodded. So, what's your grandmother's name? Continued Claire. Felisa, Beverly told her with a weak smile. After her great-great-great-grandmother, Felisa Walker, the doctor on the first Northern Ice Cap expedition to Mars. I read about her once in Martian Medicine. Martian Medicine, echoed Takavar, as she casually slipped into the seat next to Claire. Is that still required reading? Beverly hadn't noticed the 3 first-year cadets who suddenly stepped up to the table. 2 of the 3 roommates, Imto Partigal and Dooley Breach, were breathless. Beverly had no doubt they were pressed to keep up with her slender, long-legged companion, the Vulcan, Takavar. No, don't worry, Takavar, replied Beverly, sighing. Claire and I were just talking over past lives. Whose past life? Said Imto eagerly. The Arcturian was suddenly interested in continuing the conversation. Beverly thought Imto wanted to talk so he could catch his breath, but then again, like most Arcturians, she knew he had an intense curiosity about everything. She smiled as she remembered their first class together. Imto's hand was always in the air to raise a point or ask a question. Physically, the Arcturian was small, with light skin that contrasted with his black and white streaked curly hair. He had high cheekbones and a pointed chin, but it was his large, coal-black eyes capped by white, fuzzy eyebrows that everyone first noticed. And where there was Imto, there was usually his roommate, Dooley Breach. He was tall and thin, and the thick mass of freckles across his face seemed to match his short red hair. Beverly liked Dooley's infectious smile, and that he seemed to know something about everything. One minute, he could talk to you about the intricacies of warp drive, then switch to which team won the baseball World Series on Earth in the year 2014. Well, our present lives won't be too good if we don't get going, Dooley pointed out. He reached into his pocket for his assignment pad, his fingers flying across the computer's flat control panel. He checked the readout on the small screen. Next stop, Terran anatomy class. We're supposed to identify all the bones of a three-dimensional human skeleton. And I suppose you know all the parts already? Inquired Takavar, her upswept eyebrows creeping even higher as she looked at Dooley. He smiled at the dark-haired Vulcan. Of course, he replied, in a tone that implied there was no doubt. He turned to Beverly and Claire. And did you two remember that class starts 10 minutes early today? In other words, 3.6 minutes from now? Beverly stood up and walked toward the recyclator. She turned to see Imto and Dooley walk quickly out of the cafeteria behind Takavar. As first-year Starfleet medical cadets, they followed certain rules and regulations. One rule included not running to class or anywhere else. If an upperclassman caught a first-year cadet running, the result would be a quick speech, what the upperclassmen called the warp drive lecture. If an instructor caught an overly swift cadet, the cadet received a long speech that Dooley once labeled the impulse drive lecture. With no regret, Beverly watched as her half-finished plate of Gringle Dash disappeared in the recyclator. Claire placed her tray in the recyclator, and how many times do we have to say recyclator? And then leaned toward her roommate. Well, Bev, she whispered, are you with me? Beverly absently pulled on her lower lip, deep in thought. I'm thinking. She knew they shouldn't skip class, but Claire was right. They had studied Terran anatomy for the past 3 days and knew all the bones in the human body. Actually, because she knew she wanted to study medicine, Beverly had learned all the bones of the human skeleton years ago, on her own. She also liked the idea of being one of the first to view the latest artifacts in the old San Francisco archaeological dig. Plus, they were skipping class to further their education. Her grandmother would certainly approve of learning more about medicine. Oh, all right, Beverly said with a tight smile. If I don't go with you, you'll probably get into trouble. That's the Bev I know, responded Claire. She put her arm around Beverly's shoulders as they started walking out of the cafeteria. Beverly swallowed hard and hoped her afternoon would be better than her morning. Chapter 2. Beverly would never grow tired of walking through the academy grounds. The Presidio, as the academy grounds were called, was built on the old military base of the same name. She once read about the old base. Large barracks held rows of beds for the military personnel. Old homes were converted to accommodate officers, and long warehouses stored military equipment. But the grounds no longer held barracks, old homes, or warehouses. It now housed the classrooms and dorms of the top training academy in the Federation, Starfleet Academy. Beverly remembered the orientation lecture her first week at the academy. The ensign who guided the new cadets around the campus explained how the Presidio was surrounded by many famous sites. To the north was one of the oldest standing monuments to remarkable engineering, the Golden Gate Bridge. To the east and south was the busy and bustling city of San Francisco. And to the west was the constant crashing surf of the deep blue Pacific Ocean. The campus grounds added to the natural and technological wonders of the San Francisco area. Beverly wasn't used to being surrounded by the leading edge of science. Most of the colonies on which she lived had a minimum of Federation technology. She was becoming comfortable with the many gadgets, transporters, and shuttles, but often thought her grandmother would not like life at the academy. She would probably wonder where to find her herbs. Why not? It's correct in English. And she would definitely question the funny wand in Beverly's pocket, the medical scanner that all medical cadets were given on their first day at the academy. The academy buildings were all light gray, almost a perfect color match to the structures at the nearby United Federation of Planets grounds in San Francisco. Beverly was particularly fascinated by the south-facing white solar collectors that capped the campus buildings. The ensign explained that microcells within the collectors gathered energy from the sun for lighting, heating, and cooling, and replicator power throughout the buildings. And of course, the ensign had added the climate was controlled. Finding enough sunlight to run the solar collecting microcells was not a problem. Cutting between the grays and whites of the buildings were a crisscross of walkways lined with tall trees and gardens of colorful flowers. The hardy plants were not only from Earth, but also from Earth-like planets. Beverly recognized yellow and orange marigolds and tall, deep red hollyhocks from Earth. Blue spinners from Granamy sang as they moved in the slight breeze, and the thin fronds of the foggy ferns from Sirius 2 looked misty in the sunlight. As they walked by a row of white and pink dahlias, Beverly suddenly felt the natural coolness of water. Looking down, she saw a small trickle of water cutting through the garden at her feet. Following the water's path with her eyes, she noticed it led to the larger stream that ran under a wooden bridge in the distance. Since coming to the academy, she'd visited the bridge often, relaxing as she listened to the stream's soft babble. I bet the Presidio was just as beautiful in the 21st century, Beverly thought, at least until a major earthquake struck the area, tearing the city apart. In order to get to the archaeological dig, Beverly and Claire walked across a wide path to the southeast end of the Presidio. Beverly expected the dig to be a large hole in the earth. She was amazed when it looked more like a cave than a hole. The cadets watched as people dressed in light blue coveralls walked in and out of the cave, many carrying artifacts to set on long tables just outside the dig. Look, Bev, said Claire, grabbing Beverly's shirt sleeve, pulling her close to a nearby table. That looks like a stethoscope. Beverly leaned closer to the corroded disc. It's a little crumbly, but I think that round disc is what they used to listen to the pulse and heart. And there's a hypodermic needle, Claire added. She pointed to a dirty tube with a needle at one end. They actually inserted the needle end into a patient to give them medicine. Beverly shuddered. Ugh. Thank goodness for hypo sprays. Can I help you? Said a voice. Beverly turned and straightened. A Starfleet lieutenant commander stood behind the cadets, a quizzical look on her face. Beverly imagined that it was probably rare to see medical cadets at an archaeological dig. Oh, yes, I'm Cadet Clairvoy, Claire said smoothly. She held her hand out to the officer. And this is Cadet Beverly Howard. She motioned to her roommate. Starfleet Medical. I'm Lieutenant Commander Grizik from Starfleet Archaeology and Anthropology, or ANA as we call it, she said with a smile. She shook both cadets' hands. Her dark hair was short, and her blue eyes matched her coveralls. We heard the hospital was being opened up today, Claire continued. We just wanted to, be here for the excitement. Beverly thought the officer looked slightly nervous as she quickly scanned the dig. I know what you mean. I didn't sleep a wink last night thinking about today's dig. Are you both here to help? Before Beverly could say anything, Claire answered, Sure. Beverly tried to smile, but it was more like a grimace. She knew how Claire had talked her into coming to the dig. Now she wondered how Claire had talked her into joining the dig. Well, good. There's a replicator over there. Just order some coveralls and gloves. Believe me, you'll need them, she said, holding up her dirty gloves to show the cadets. Beverly glared at Claire as they ordered and then struggled into the coveralls. She wanted to tell Claire that she'd gone too far this time, But before she could comment to her roommate, an ensign waved them into the opening of the cave. As they put on their gloves, they stepped down several small metal stairs and into the dig. Beverly looked around and whistled. The cave was deeper than she expected, reaching back about 100 yards from the opening. Bright white light bathed the far end of the dig as workers took hollow images of the fresh cave-in opening. Nearby, sparks flew as an A&A officer used a large laser cutter to slice into a chunk of metal protruding from the wall. Tricorders whirred as several workers recorded each artifact. As Beverly and Claire walked to the far end of the roomy cave, they saw artifacts everywhere, in the walls, on the floor, and even sticking out from the ceiling. Grisick was already there. She was using a handheld laser cutter to gently scrape dirt from a metal box stuck in a side wall. "Welcome to the dungeon," she said, smiling, as she worked on the thick object. "We're working on the basement of the hospital. Get one of the laser cutters and help me cut out this package. It's hard to read the side of the box, but I think it says something about wooden tongue depressors. Hopefully the package is well sealed. We might find some that haven't decayed." "Tongue depressors," muttered Beverly as she walked over to the nearby equipment bay. "I'm skipping class for tongue depressors?" Claire smiled and nodded. Beverly grinned back sarcastically at her roommate. The cadets each picked up a laser cutter and turned to help Grisick. By watching the lieutenant commander, Beverly soon figured out how to extract an artifact from the dirt. She pushed the wall with her gloved fingers, testing the hardness of the dirt. Setting the laser cutter on low allowed her to gently cut through loose sections of the wall. A higher setting would cut through the more solid, compacted dirt. It was slow work. As she peeled off layer after layer of dirt, Beverly suddenly saw the tip of a shiny object. Slowly cutting away the dirt, she found what looked like two long metal sticks hinged together in the middle. The metal was shaped into wide ovals on the ends of both sticks. Beverly smiled as Grisick announced her first real find, a pair of operating room scissors. Beverly was soon fascinated, not only by the many artifacts, but with the story that Grisick told as they worked. The officer explained how an earthquake measuring 7.8 on the Richter scale struck the area in 2036, virtually leveling much of San Francisco. As Beverly helped her cut through several layers of dirt around another object, Grisick further explained how the structural supports in 21st century buildings differed from modern buildings. "By the 22nd century," continued the lieutenant commander, "we developed billerite, the building material that absorbs the shake of an earthquake measuring up to 6.5 on the Richter scale. And now we regulate the larger earthquakes with special satellites orbiting the Earth. But back then, even the smaller tremors would crack buildings. So when the big quake came, the city was in ruin," finished Beverly. Grisick nodded. She further explained that after the quake, the city officials decided to bury most of the old city and build a new city on top. Fewer roads were rebuilt throughout the city, and new building regulations were proposed to lessen the damage from future large quakes. Beverly knew about one of those rules from her reading. For excuse me. For close to a century after the quake, no structure built in San Francisco could be more than 3 stories high. "We had some trouble finding this hospital. We had maps of the old city, but all the large and small quakes in the past 2 centuries managed to shift many buildings and parts of the land into different positions," Grisick pointed out. "We were lucky. One of our academy students in A&A found part of a hospital sign after yesterday's cave-in. And as you can see, the laser cutters did the rest to clear out some debris." Beverly half listened as Grisick and Claire continued to talk about old medical equipment. But something was bothering her. Pulling out broken objects and talking about the devastating earthquake brought back memories. Beverly suddenly shivered. It reminded her of the disaster on Arvada 3. She and her grandmother moved to Arvada 3 to help with the new Federation colony. By the time they arrived, over 200,000 colonists were scattered across the two large continents, all there with the promise of colonizing the new world. Beverly remembered the planet's nighttime sky the most, two bright and beautiful moons passing one another night after night. The deeply fractured small moon always outpacing the bigger moon in their constant spins around the planet. The scientists took readings of the moons, noted their composition, and then turned their attention to colonizing Arvada 3. One short Arvada year after Beverly and her grandmother arrived, the moons went astray. They came closer together in their orbit, as they had done for hundreds of thousands of years before the colonists arrived, but this time the gravitational tug of the larger moon pulled off a piece of the fragile smaller moon. In 2 more orbits around the planet, the 1-mile-wide rock flew into the path of Arvada. It smashed into the shallow ocean, sending water, steam, and dust high into the planet's atmosphere. Soon clouds and dust filled the sky, blocking the sunlight for weeks. Streams and rivers swelled as the teeming rain saturated the ground. Water tore through towns and broke through natural dams in the rivers. The winds increased, blowing many homes apart and causing ocean waves to tear away long stretches of towns along the shorelines. It was as if 100 hurricanes suddenly hit the land and sea all at once. The medical supplies ran out first. Beverly remembered her grandmother's small figure covered with mud and rain as she searched the still-standing woods nearby. She would look for herbs and roots, then tend the injured with the planet's natural cures. Smaller Starfleet vessels closest to the planet brought some food and medicine, but they could not supply every town and city. It took almost a month before enough ships could reach the planet and rescue all the colonists. During that time, Beverly learned the hard way about roots and herbs and how to use them for food and medicine. It was then, too, that she told herself if she made it out alive, she would devote her life to helping others to survive. "Heads up! Out! Now!" Shouting shook Beverly from her thoughts. She looked around and saw a Starfleet captain yelling orders. One of the walls was quickly collapsing, and just as fast a containment field shimmered into view to hold back the dust and debris. But the containment field was not fast enough. A strong, pungent odor quickly filled the cave. Even though the air filters were activated, several people coughed violently as they ran away from the latest cave-in. The red and white emergency lights turned on as the bright lights flickered and went out. "Come on!" Grisik yelled, quickly turning and pushing the cadets toward the cave opening. Beverly dropped her laser cutter and ran, with Grisik and Claire following close behind. As she ran, Beverly covered her mouth and nose with a cloth she had in her coveralls. It was easy to follow the line of the emergency lights, but the uneven floor made it difficult to run. Claire tripped once and grabbed Beverly for support. Beverly was wishing for a strong flashlight when she finally saw the light of the cave opening. Beverly was first to run up the metal stairs and reach the outside. She turned around and braced herself against the outside wall. Reaching out, she pulled people up the stairs as fast as possible. Several times, she felt as if her arm would be pulled out of its socket. Some workers were coughing as she pulled them up. Others were covering their mouths and noses with a cloth or their shirt sleeves. In a few minutes, everyone was out of the cave. Beverly leaned back and let out a sigh of relief and tried to stop her heart from racing. The news of the latest cave-in traveled fast. Beverly jumped when she heard the hum of transporters, and suddenly Starfleet medical and emergency personnel were everywhere. Beverly watched with interest as a doctor checked her with a medical tricorder. As she looked around the crowd at the opening of the cave, she spotted Claire. She nodded to her roommate, indicating that she was all right. Claire nodded back. Beverly overheard the captain tell the lieutenant commander to proceed with decontamination. His tricorder had indicated that the gas was probably from the hospital garbage, and he and the two officers closest to the cave-in should be checked. As the officers disappeared in the shimmer of a transporter on their way to Sick Bay 4, Grizzick ordered everyone to remove their dirty gloves and coveralls. As Beverly and Claire slipped off their overclothes, a special bin was transported to the area to hold the clothes for decontamination. "Great," Grizzick moaned as she dropped her coveralls in the bin next to Beverly. "We were trying to develop a holodeck simulation of the hospital. Looks like we have to postpone that for a while. And here comes the commander in charge of the simulation." Beverly turned around and gasped. She recognized the muscular blonde officer heading in their direction. It was Commander Max Wiley, the professor who taught her holodeck simulation course, Medical Emergencies. In fact, Beverly thought with a shiver he was the Max Wiley, one of the toughest professors at the academy. She was afraid her jaw was hanging open. "Oh no," Beverly heard Claire whisper. "Over here, Commander," called Grizzick, waving to the officer. She sighed deeply as he approached. "Sir, we were just taking hollow images when part of the west wing caved again. It's behind a containment field right now, but we won't be able to get back inside for a few hours." Wiley nodded and said nothing. "Oh, and Commander," she said, turning to Beverly and Claire, "we don't get many cadets from Starfleet Medical asking to help with the dig, and these two cadets were very helpful before and after the cave-in." Wiley turned to the cadets and folded his arms across his broad chest. "Cadets Howard and Voy, both first-year cadets," he said. They both stiffened. Grizzick looked stunned. "Most first-year cadets I know have a class at this time of the day," he continued. "Well, Beverly started to say. "You what, Cadet Howard?" pressed Wiley. He leaned closer. He resisted the urge to lean back. "You aren't in class. You are here. You skipped class. Am I right?" Beverly nodded, and Claire looked down at the ground. "Which class?" "Terran anatomy, sir," answered Beverly, feeling her face flush. "This is unbecoming a Starfleet cadet," Wiley said sternly. Beverly cringed as he added, "Both of you, come with me. We're going to pay the commanding officer of Starfleet Medical a visit." Beverly realized her afternoon was turning out to be worse than her morning.